ABLOY pin and cam. I've called it a pin and cam because basically that's what it is. It's no different to any other pin and cam system. It's just the way that the tool has been designed is radically different, obviously, because it's an ABLOY lock. I don't want to go over it in too much depth, but the advantage of this system is its speed. Its speed, in particular, in the speed or the time that it takes to teach. It's very easy, especially to somebody who's already familiar with a pin and cam system and knows what they're trying to do with one. Somebody who's familiar with a pin and cam system could virtually pick this up and immediately put it into the lock and start using it and get the lock open. The speed and the time it takes to open the lock should not exceed really 10 minutes. I mean, it will depend on what the code is. If the lock contains a lot of 5 codes and not a lot of 0s and 1s, it's going to take longer to get to that code than if the lock has predominantly got 0 and 1 discs in it. But the average lock is going to have probably about 2 of each disc, bearing in mind that there's 11 discs and there's 6 codes. You're probably going to get at least... every lock has got a 0 at the bottom and a 0 at the top. So that means that there's only 9 other discs. You're probably going to get 1 of everything and 2 of the odd one or 2 of 1 or 2 of the other remaining codes. So you should look at an opening time of between 5 and 10 minutes on the average lock. The great thing about this system is that it leaves no forensic evidence whatsoever. Nothing is being introduced between the discs inside the lock. The other thing is that there's very little that they can do to stop this working, not without redesigning the lock almost entirely from scratch. It doesn't make any difference if the spaces between the discs are solid. It makes no difference if the discs are reversible or non-reversible, and it doesn't make any difference what size the diameter of the discs are. This system will work. Okay, I've got a lock in the vise here. This is an 11-disc lock. Now, this is the decoder when it's not loaded, and what we've got here is a main body and a central shaft which has got on the end of it a 0 cut. Now the bottom disc is always a 0, and the bottom disc has got a tag on it, which means that it will only turn 90 degrees before it picks up the core and drives the core round inside the lock. Now when the core turns, the sidebar is forced in against the sides of the discs. So what we can do is we can place the variable key pieces onto here, and with the pick shaft, which is this part that slides down alongside that, we can move individual pieces further round and test them to see if they're loose or if they're tight. If they're tight, they need to be changed. If they're loose, they don't need to be changed. And that is simply all we do. We check all of the remaining 9 discs, and those that are rigid we change, those that are loose we don't change. And that progresses until eventually the lock opens, and when the lock opens we have the code. Now in the kit is the panel which contains in it the variable key pieces. Now it has standard full cuts and standard half cuts. The half cuts have been introduced for technical reasons. It is quicker to get the lock open by using half cuts, but then we have to resolve it a little bit further afterwards. So what I've said on the card is that you start with a full cut at the bottom, which is already fitted onto the tool, because the tip of the tool is a 0 cut, and you start with a correct 0 cut at the top, which is the 11th position. In between that we use half cuts. The other reason why we use half cuts is that if you've got a full cut 0, it can't move because it is a full semicircle and it sits within a semicircular disc and won't move. By putting a half cut in, we've still got a little bit of tolerance, so we can still check the 0 cut to see if there's any movement. So what I'm going to do here is open up the box, which is sealed with screws. These little components that you will see in here have been wire roded, and they are very accurately machined components. And what you do is you start at this end with the half cuts. Forget the full cuts, because we'll use the full cuts to identify the correct code afterwards. Also in the kit is the grease, The grease is critical to the use of the tool. What we do is pull back the pick and introduce the grease into these slots, or into the bitting along the shaft of the pick, and that has to be done, otherwise the little pieces just won't stay on when you're trying to put them into the lock. Now this particular lock has 11 discs. We've already got the 0 at the bottom, and what we're going to do is put a full 0, which is a proper 0, at the top, because every ABLOY has a 0 on the top disc. So in that position I put a 0. Then I'm going to put the pick forward, and that locks that piece in, so that piece now cannot fall out. It's held in by the pick. And the 9 remaining discs that we don't know the code for, I'm going to put half zeros in. Now part of the main difficulty in learning this system is learning how to use, or how to insert these little pieces in. There's a certain knack to doing it, and if you don't have that knack, you end up knocking little pieces out and moving bits as you're trying to actually decode it. Basically you hold the tool like this and put them in from the right, and then pull them to the left, and then they just stop when they get to the correct position. Obviously you would have the pieces stacked in before you went to the lock, and then all you would do is just change the pieces as relevant, so you're not going to be doing this in the doorway. Now I'm just going to change that piece, because that piece is a little bit bent. Okay. With most ABLOYs that you do, there will be 9 discs that you do not know the code for. The remaining 2 discs will be zeros. That's the bottom one and the top one. Of course, occasionally you'll come across locks that only have 9 discs, and the top and the bottom one will be zeros, so there'll only be 7 discs you don't know the code for, and they should be a little bit quicker to open. Okay, so that's the lock completely loaded up. None of those pieces can fall off, because the pick is extended past them and holding them in position, and you won't be able to see it from there, but you will see that the faces, the leading face of these 9 discs in the middle, is exactly 9 degrees short of the leading face of the bottom 0 and of the top 0, because those are proper zeros and these are half zeros. They're halfway between a 0 and a 1. So we've got a slight trailing of the face of those zeros, and that's true for all of the pieces in this lower row, that the 1 is slightly short of a 1, the 2 is slightly short of a 2, and so on and so forth. Now the essence of the tool is the way it actually works, and that is that the pick, which runs through all these discs, has got a little nose on the end of it, and there's a little bit of movement of it. So when I'm in position number 1 and I turn this, that bottom piece, unless you're very closely zoomed in you won't be able to see it, but that bottom piece is moving forward, a bit like the hands of a clock, and it's progressing forward of the others. If I click it back, I can move the second piece and the third piece. I can test any individual piece. Now when this goes into the lock and I apply tension, certain discs will bind up, and when I try to move them, the little piece won't want to move because the disc is rigid inside the lock. So I will then know that that particular piece needs to be changed, and I would change it from a half 0 to a half 1, and then from then to a half 2, until it comes into a position where it's loose. Although the discs inside the lock have false notches, that makes no difference whatsoever. What tends to happen is a disc is rigid, you change it, and then it goes loose because it goes into a false notch. But when all of the discs are in a false notch, it will then begin to bind on the bottom of the false notch, and then you will change it and it will bind onto the surface, and then it'll go into the next notch, and eventually it'll go into the true notch, and that is the only position where it will remain loose until the lock actually opens. So there we have the lock loaded. I shall just put these pieces here so that I can get access to them. This is the lock. The pick goes fully forward always to insert the tool into the lock, Before I remove the tool, I will pull the pick forward again to lock all the pieces in, and then once I've changed the relevant piece, I'll put the pick forward before I reintroduce it. Here's the card. The card has on it the 11 discs. The bottom disc I've called X because it's not a disc I can change, it's fixed on the tool. And then there's the numbers 1 to 9, and the numbers 1 to 9 are the discs that we don't know the code for. And on the back of the tool are the numbers 1 to 9 here, and then 0. Of course, 0 we do know because we know it's a 0. It always is a 0. The 11th disc, effectively, which is the top disc, is always a 0. Now, all I'm going to do is, it's very similar to the bilock. I'm going to work my way down, and if I find something that's rigid, I'm going to cross it off and then progress to the next box. Okay, so all we do is we turn backwards, which brings all the discs, all the little pieces, into their starting position. I then slide the tool down into the lock. It's not advantageous to force it in any way whatsoever. It slides down into the lock. Just turn to face the tool and turn that over so I can see the numbers. There we are, and now I apply torque. The torque is applied with the central shaft of the tool. So there we go, we've got the torque on. Now, the bottom disc is loose. I've got movement. I've still got the torque on. I then go into position 2. There's not as much movement there. There's a bit of rigidity. 3 is completely loose. 4 is rigid. So 2 and 4. 5 is rigid. 6 is rigid. 7 is rigid. 8 is rigid. 9 is rigid. And 0 is a 0 anyway, so we don't need to worry about that. So what we've actually got on this lock is a lot. I mean, this is a very good example. I mean, you don't often get this many responses from one run-through. And it's not advantageous to be greedy and to try and change too much at a time. I would change those discs, only those discs that were the most rigid, if I had too many to choose from. But usually on a run-through, you will only find maybe 2, sometimes 3 discs that are binding at any given moment in time. So, okay, so that's loose. 2, 3, 5 needs changing for sure. I'm going to change 5 and 9 because they are the ones that are the worst out of those. So what I do is I go back to 0, which means the pick is holding 0, and that means that the one in front of it, which is 9, is free. I slip that one out and I change that for the next one down. And then I go down to 6 so that I can slip out 5 and change that one down. Again, as long as I pull the pieces in this way, they won't slip out. So what I've effectively done now is I've changed those cuts from a 0 rather to a 1, and I've done it in position 9 and in position 5. So those two are not zeros. We then go back into the lock, and of course the great advantage of this is that if it's a particularly awkward target, you can do this over several visits, and each time you only need to be there long enough to take your readings. 4 is rigid. 6 is rigid. Again, some of those others were rigid, but 4 and 6 were the ones that were worst, and I don't want to make a mistake, so I'm not going to get greedy and change too much in one go. I go to 7, pull out 6 and change that. And then I go down to 5, strip out 4 and change that. It is the best way is to move the pick down to the one just before the one you want to change. That way everything's held rigid, and you've got less chance of pulling out too accidentally with your fingers. Right, 1 is loose. Four is rigid again. Right. Only 4 there was majorly resistant, so we've already changed 4 once. Now we're going to change it again. So now, obviously, I have to look at my card, and I can see that 4 is a 1, so I need to change it to a 2. I get suspicious of any lock which gives me too many rigid readings in one go. Right, now on that particular one there, nothing was rock solid. 2 has got a bit of tension on it. And 6. I'm going to change 2 and 6. So 2 goes from a 0 to a 1. And 7, I go to 7 to change 6. At the moment 6 is a 1, so I have to change it down to a 2. I have tried decoding the locks starting at the other end of the scale, starting with 5s and then making the cuts progressively bigger, but I found that this was the best way, this was the most effective way in getting the lock open. Right, 2 is dead solid. In fact, 2 is the only thing on that particular run through that was solid, so we go from a 1 to a 2. As with any pin and cam system, you get to instinctively know when things are going right. You don't often find that you have to go to the same disc more than twice in a row, because it's bound to encounter a false notch until you get, you see, now that's the 3rd time I've been to 2, so it's showing me that most of the others are probably correct at the moment, and that's the only thing that's holding it open at this precise moment in time. So now we go from, that's not a 2, it goes to a 3, and you will notice that there are only 5 compartments in this box, although there are 6 cuts. If it isn't a 0, 1, 2, 3 or 4, it has to be a 5, and the shaft of the tool is cut to a 5. So if I find that I've got a number 4 piece in and it's still rigid, I take the 4 piece out and then I go back into the lock without a piece in the decoder, and without a piece in, it will then assume the shape of a 5. And that's exactly what I think I need to do there. That's 2 again. 4's got something on it. 2 needs to change, and so does 4. Right, we've tried 2 as a 1, we've tried it as a 0, we've tried it as a 2 and as a 3. So now we try it as a 4, and if it's still rigid, we will take that piece out and then we will go into the lock without a piece in the decoder. There was another one I was going to change there, but I forgot which one it was, so I'll just do the sequence again. Right. Yeah, and it is. Now that particular disc, I've tried it as everything except a 5, and a 5 is no piece at all. I just take that out and I go straight back in without a piece in there. Obviously, if it isn't a 0, it isn't a 1, 2, 3 or 4, it must be a 5. You can still test it although there isn't a piece in there, because the pick itself can still move it, and now it is actually loose. 4 needs to be changed, 6 needs to be changed, 7 needs to be changed. I'm going to change 6 and 7 because they were the worst. Now 7 was a 0, so that becomes a 1. 6 at the moment is a 1, so that becomes a 2. You sometimes, as you turn the pick, the lock turns a little bit further and sort of like clicks into position. That's a very good indication that you're getting close, because it's clicking into the gate. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. I think 7, out of all of those, 7 was the one that was the most rigid. 7 at the moment is a 1. That becomes a 2. Right, so the easiest way to make a mistake is to forget to cross something off, and then what you end up doing is changing a piece for the same size piece, which obviously is going around in circles. Four is rigid. Four is not a 2. Getting glare there. Six, 7, I'll actually change 8 as well there. 8 is a 0. Seven is a 1 and becomes a 2. And 6 is a 3 and becomes a 4. Right, it's 8. 8 at the moment is a 1, it becomes a 2. Now that is very close to opening. It's actually, I can hear the sidebar, I can feel the sidebar clicking in. And it's turning substantially more. Alright, that's 7 is wrong. Right, at the moment 7 is a 2. For a while now I've had no response on those discs at the bottom. All I'm getting is responses on a few at the top, and that's quite common. That's 7 again. So that becomes now a 4. Okay. No, sorry, I crossed it off as a 3. It now is a 4, so that's 4, 4, that's correct. Okay, everything in there is now loose except for number 4. Okay, and 4 at the moment is a 3. It has to become a 4. Again. Now it has to be a 5. And of course if it isn't a 5, I will still feel rigidity on the pick, so that would then indicate that I've gone past whatever the code was, and then I would go back up to 0. Everything's loose except 4. We took something out. I'm just going to go back down on 4. Put the 0 back in. Because they are half cuts, there sometimes is a little bit of a tolerance, but everything in there is very loose. The lock's been responding very well to what I've been trying to do. I think that all that's happened is I've missed the code somewhere. It's definitely not that one. So I'm just going back down on that particular sequence. Okay. That's 4. I'm going to change 4 down to a 1. That bottom piece has got slightly damaged. I'll just change it. Occasionally the pieces do get caught as you're trying to pull the tool out. They won't get stuck in there, but they can get slightly damaged. That's fine. 1 to a 2. That's it. Now I've just moved that. It's actually opened the lock. As I moved that, I progressively made that piece longer. In other words, it was halfway between a 1 and a 2, and as I extended it, I made it actually become a 1, which is more of a rotation on it. That implies now that because it's a half cut, it's probably a 1 or a 2, and that's why you've got the full cuts in there, because now I'd have to experiment by putting in the full cuts to the same code to see if it opens smoothly. And then you will have the correct code. Unfortunately, with the half cuts, you end up in a situation where quite often it opens on the 2 codes. So you have to progress it a little bit further. That was fine and opened. If I then relock it and try to open it again, I'll probably end up in the same situation where it doesn't open until I move that 4. So I think that it's possible that